Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you all to my History Reaction channel. Today we'll be looking at Life in the 13 American Colonies Explained by Mr. Beat. Now this is one of his older videos. I subscribed to Mr. Beat about a year ago or so and I've seen most of his, if not all of his videos since then. I have not as of yet gone through his back catalog. So we're going to be remedying that and I will be going through his back catalog with the rest of you. As always, I will include a link to the original video in the description down below. If you like what you see here, please head over to Mr. Beat's channel. Consider giving him a like and subscribe there. We want to encourage guys like Mr. Beat to keep making these wonderful videos. Anyway, when I was looking through his back catalog, this one is one of several that jumped out at me because I'm actually very interested in early colonial American history prior to the Revolution. That's one of the few periods in American history that really fascinate me. So I'm not going to say I'm an expert on that period by any stretch of the imagination, but I know a pretty good amount about the colonial period. So we'll just see how this goes, and I'll try to add content like I usually do. This is a fairly short one, and Mr. Beat is usually right on the ball getting good information. So I don't know how much I can add that he isn't already going to cover in this short period. But we'll do what we can to get into this.
Story time with Mr. Beat.
Okay.
What is colonial? My name is Mr. Beat. By the 1700s, life in the British North American colonies was a lot easier than it was for its earliest settlers.
Very true.
Here's the story of how it was like living in one of the 13 original American colonies.
Okay.
Once upon a time, there were 13 British colonies along the east coast of North America. In 1607, Virginia was established as the first one.
The first permanent settlement. There had been some earlier that had not succeeded. Probably the most famous one would be Roanoke. I'd also point out that there were non-English colonies that had been established and failed as well, or in some cases continued. For example, Spanish down in Florida had St. Augustine. That'd been around for quite a while before this happened. But of course, we're not talking about the original 13 colonies there. And if you want to go further back than that, you've got Viking colony up in Canada. So, yeah, and I don't think there was originally 13 colonies. I think it was actually 15? Because a couple of them would be absorbed into other colonies later on.
In 1620, the second one, Plymouth Colony, was established.
So Plymouth Colony will be absorbed later into Massachusetts Bay Colony.
1626, New York. 1630, Massachusetts Bay. 1633, Maryland, or Maryland. 1636, there were two new colonies to begin, Rhode Island and Connecticut. The next year,
my earliest ancestor that I know of in the United States was a young man named Arthur Jordan. He came over in 1632 as a headwright to Jamestown, Virginia.
The colony of New Haven in
New Haven, that's the other one. That one gets absorbed into Connecticut.
38, two more, New Hampshire and Delaware. 1653, North Carolina. 1663, South Carolina. The next year, New Jersey. 1682, Pennsylvania. And the last one, Georgia, in 1732. Whoa, Mr. Beat, that's 15, not 13. Don't you know how to count? Well, in 1691, Plymouth Colony merged with the Massachusetts Bay Colony, eventually called just Massachusetts.
Yeah, and Massachusetts at that time incorporated what we now know of as Maine. Maine would be separated out as a separate state later on as part of compromises to deal with the slavery issue.
And in 1664, New Haven merged with Connecticut. Today, we classify these colonies into three groups.
Okay.
Number one, the New England colonies.
Right.
Number two, the Middle Colonies. And number three, the Southern colonies. And now, please allow me to speak in generalities.
All right.
The New England colonies, made up of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. The New England colonies were generally more religious, and though its settlers came to America to practice their religion freely, they ironically did not tolerate any other religion other than their own.
So we're talking about New England colonies. That's absolutely right, especially Massachusetts, which I think is what he's going to get into here. Massachusetts is originally Puritan, especially Plymouth. They're fairly strict. later on, you're going to see groups of Puritans from Massachusetts breaking off to form other states, Rhode Island and Connecticut. Rhode Island being settled by people who felt the Puritans were too strict, and Connecticut being the opposite, being more hardline Puritans.
Massachusetts was made up of Puritans, but some Puritans didn't think the Puritans in Massachusetts were devout enough.
Okay.
So they left and started the colonies of Connecticut and New Haven. Meanwhile, Puritans like Anne Hutchinson
Rhode
and
Island.
Roger Williams, who thought the Puritans in Massachusetts were too restrictive, left.
Yeah, and Anne Hutchinson, if you're not familiar with her, her story is fascinating. If you get a chance, look into Anne Hutchinson. She was very outspoken about religion at a time when women, well, people in general, you don't speak out against religion, but especially if you're a woman. She gets tangled up in witchcraft accusations. It really gets fascinating with Anne Hutchinson.
Well, they were kicked out to form the colony of Rhode Island. Rhode Island actually had the freedom of religion and a radical idea of separating church and state.
Right.
In New England towns along the coast, the colonists made their living fishing, whaling, and shipbuilding. Because farming was difficult, New England began to develop manufacturing with industries like shipbuilding to make money. Being furthest north, the New England colonies were the coldest, but because of this, there was less disease than in the warmer colonies further south.
Yeah, the southern colonies especially had high disease. Malaria, yellow fever. Yeah, because you had a lot of mosquitoes, you got a warm climate. We tend to think of winter being when we get sick, but warm climates are much more of a hotbed for disease. And also, like he's saying here, these colonies up here, they're primarily going to be dealing with industry. There's not great farmland up there, short growing seasons. They got a lot of timber. In fact, they're going to be supplying a lot of timber for England, but also shipbuilding, things like that, because they have all this timber. And they're going to have a lot of naval industries, like you said, whaling and so on.
Next, we have the Middle Colonies, made up of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware.
So New York is not originally British, it is Dutch, originally New Amsterdam. So we got to kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about the original 13 British colonies. New York was Dutch. It is taken over by the British, but that's where its origins lie.
These were the most diverse by far of the colonies. Different ethnic groups like the English, Swedes, Dutch, Germans, Scots, Irish, and French lived closer together here than they ever did in Europe. There were also many different religions, mostly Christian denominations, such as Quakers, Mennonites, Lutherans, Dutch Calvinists, and Presbyterians. With many religions came religious freedom, especially in Pennsylvania. The Quaker colony established by William Penn that had a constitution that protected many freedoms and would later influence the United States Constitution. Economically, the Middle Colonies served as an important shipping off point for valuable stuff to send back to Europe. Cities here.
Yeah. So some of the best harbors in the eastern United States are going to be in the middle areas. You do have Boston up in the north, but you have New York down here, which is, you know, the gold standard of shipping areas. This area is also going to be heavily industrial, but it does have good farmland. So you're going to have a good mix here. This is going to be it literally is the middle territory. It's got good industry. It's got farmers who are growing food and crops, things that will help support a growing, burgeoning society.
Like New York and Philadelphia grew quickly. Being in the middle, I know, such an original name, right? Put these colonies in the middle of everything. Really. Ideas, society, culture, the economy, you name it. They also had much more fertile soil than the North. Farming was big. They produced lots of wheat and corn and raised lots of livestock. Other industries here included the production of iron ore, lumber, textiles, furs, and shipbuilding. Finally, there's the Southern Colonies, made up of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The Southern Colonies, which also had very fertile soil, were all about the cash crops, mostly tobacco, but also rice, cotton, and indigo. Here, large plantations sprung up that required a large labor force. To fill this labor force, plantations often brought in both slaves and indentured servants to take care of the work.
So indentured servants were much earlier on. if you're not familiar with this, an indentured servant is basically somebody who sells themselves into a slave-like condition for a certain period of time in exchange for passage to the New World was the most common. For example, my ancestor came over as a headwright, which was related to the indentured servitude system. You would agree to come work for somebody for 5, 10, 15, however many years in exchange for them helping you get to the New World. Once you were done with that, theoretically, you get your own plot of land, you would start your own farm or plantation, and there you go. It didn't always happen that way. Indentured servitude lifespan was very short, and that's why you see it slowly die away in favor of actual slavery, because with slavery, you've got your servant for life. With indentured servitude, eventually, if they live long enough, you've got to let them go. And then they become competition to you. So, yeah.
Slavery became an important part of the economy in the South. Being furthest south, the winters were more mild, but the hot and humid summers caused more diseases like malaria and yellow fever to spread easily. Life expectancy was lowest in the southern colonies. There was also more religious tolerance in the southern colonies, even in Maryland, which originally was established for Roman Catholics. Georgia was the southernmost colony and the last of the colonies established, like I said earlier.
Yeah, Georgia's an interesting one. Some of the earliest settlers in Georgia, I think it used to be briefly part of South Carolina, but it was then separated off for Oglethorpe, who was using it as basically a penal colony. He was bringing over convicts to settle in the area, helps get convicts out of England, which is a great deal for the king there. But it also helped set up a new colony.
James Oglethorpe had the idea to relocate thousands of prisoners from England who were there because they couldn't pay back their debts. They were moved to Georgia to start a new life, and King George II went along with it because the colony would be a buffer between Spanish Florida and the rich plantations of South Carolina. Plus, it was named after him.
Right.
Overall, the 13 colonies were extremely diverse, almost like 13 little countries. However, they all had a lot in common. They had similar political, constitutional, and legal systems, and most of them were WASPs. No, not those WASPs. WASP.
Right, White Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
It stands for White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Most colonial families were self-reliant. Also, this might surprise you, all of the colonies had legal slavery. Also, all the colonies had a lot of self-government, and most white men could vote, as long as they had property. All the colonies...
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah, you could vote if you had property. It was not universal suffrage by any stretch of the imagination. You'd have to be a white man, and you would have to own property. And that was something that they wanted to do in the early United States as well. That was a big point of contention when they were deciding how they were going to handle our new democracy was who can vote. Should it be all white men, or should it be only those that have property and therefore are invested in the country, so to speak?
Were prosperous, and they grew quickly. In 1625, the population of the colonies, not including Native Americans, was around 2,000. By 1770...
Yeah, it started out really small. In fact, early colonies struggled, especially the earliest. Like I said before, there were several early attempts that completely failed. Again, Roanoke being the poster child of those. There were others. Roanoke was not the only one. But Jamestown makes it barely. They do have the starving time where they had such a rough winter that they nearly all died off. Those who did survive had to resort to cannibalism. So, yeah, by, the first 30 years were nightmarish for these people. There's a very low population. This is when my ancestor came over. And it wasn't easy for them. It was by no means easy, especially for the earliest, because like the earliest Jamestown settlers, they were primarily people who had no survival experience to speak of. They were more or less the upper echelon of British citizenry, and they had no idea what they were in for. They were ill prepared for what they were up against. later on, you're going to see people who are a little better suited for it coming in.
75, that number had swollen to 2.5 million. And this group in 1775 didn't have nearly as much in common with or as much loyalty to their European ancestors.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, because we've been here, for 130 odd years, a little more than that. By this time, these guys still nominally British citizens, but they actually come from a very diverse set of backgrounds. There were the Dutch, the Swedish, the Germans, the Irish, the Scotch, and many other nationalities mixed in here. The colonies still belonged to England, but the citizenry was very, very ethnically diverse. Well, Africans, obviously, I forgot to mention them. And we need to count them. We need to include them in this because they are part of this culture too. And yeah, by 1775, it may have been a British colony, but these guys, even though they were technically British citizens, were very removed from their ancestry.
These American colonies had developed a brand new, very distinct society, and soon they would be leaving their European ancestors behind.
Yep.
The end.
All right. So that was a very simple video. I wish we could have had a longer one to go into more detail, because this, I think, is a very fascinating part of American history. And I think a lot of what we think of as the American character comes from this early period, which is the Great American Melting Pot, where we've got people from all over the world coming here and mixing together and developing a brand new, unique identity, different from and distinct from those in the homelands of all these various peoples. Yes, the colonies were nominally British, but that's in name only by the time you hit 1700. The people are radically different than the folks back home. Anyway, interesting stuff. I'm glad you were here to watch this with me. I intend to do some more Matt Beat in the near future. So if you have any of his videos you'd like me to look at, by all means, let me know down in the comments below. Until then, thank you for joining me. See you next time. Bye-bye.